They said they couldn't be twins, but the truth shocked everyone. The night was long and heavy with rain, the kind that drummed endlessly against the hospital windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to mark time for the exhausted woman in the small maternity ward. Her body ached with the labor of bringing life into the world, but her heart swelled with both fear and hope. She was young, poorer than she wanted to admit, and the father of her children had long since disappeared. Still, she had clung to her pregnancy as if it were a promise, carrying the weight of not one child but two. She whispered prayers between her breaths, asking for strength, asking that her babies would arrive safely. The cries came first from the midwife, urging her to push harder, and then from the small, powerful wail of the first boy. He was lifted into the dim light of the room, his skin a deep, rich brown, his hair already curling against his damp forehead. The mother's chest shook with sobs of relief as the nurses cleaned him, wrapped him gently, and placed him in her arms. She looked at him as though the world outside the hospital walls no longer existed, his small mouth rooting instinctively, his fists clenched as if he were already preparing to fight for his place in life. But the labor was not over. The second child was slower to come, the mother's body trembling with exhaustion, yet finally, after what felt like endless waves of pain, another cry pierced the room. The nurses' voices faltered. One of them gasped softly, and the other glanced toward the midwife with raised brows. The baby they lifted into the light looked nothing like his brother. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh hospital lamp, his hair golden and fine as silk. He cried just as loudly, just as strongly, but the whispers began before he was even placed in his mother's arms. The young woman blinked in confusion, her breath still ragged as she reached for him. She gathered him into her chest beside his brother, one dark and one light, two lives pressed against the same heart. To her there was no question. These were her sons, bound by the same blood, shaped within the same womb. Yet as she held them close, she could hear the murmurs circling the room like shadows. "Impossible," one nurse whispered. "Maybe a mistake," another said under her breath. The midwife silenced them with a sharp look, but even her expression betrayed doubt. The babies were weighed, measured, and swaddled, their small cries weaving together like a duet that belonged to the same song. Yet the contrast between them was undeniable. One with the deep brown skin of his mother, the other with pale white skin that seemed to glow against the hospital sheets. By the time relatives arrived, the whispers had grown louder. An aunt peered into the crib, her lips tightening. A cousin raised an eyebrow, muttering about rumors that would surely spread. Some even avoided looking at the mother directly, as though shame lived in her arms alongside her children. But the young woman refused to let the doubt seep into her heart. She pressed her lips to each of their tiny foreheads, feeling their warmth, their shared breath against her chest. She knew what the others did not. These boys were twins, not divided by difference, but joined by the mystery of life itself. No matter what the world whispered, no matter what doubts followed them beyond that hospital, she would hold them close and raise them as brothers. They were hers, and they were each other's, and that was enough. The boys grew side by side. Two small bodies tumbling across the floor of their mother's modest home, their laughter filling the rooms with warmth. One had deep brown skin and dark curls that tightened when the summer heat lingered, the other pale skin that burned easily in the sun, his golden hair catching the light like strands of wheat. They were different in appearance, but in every other way they were inseparable. They crawled together, learned to walk together, and spoke their first halting words within days of each other. Their mother would watch them with a tired but grateful smile, reminding herself that no matter what others said, she knew the truth that bound them. They were twins, her twins, and nothing could change that. In their early years, the boys never questioned the divide others saw. To them, they were simply brothers, sharing toys, trading bites of food when their mother was not looking, and curling against each other at night when the air grew too cold. They finished each other's sentences, defended one another in playground scuffles, and looked for each other first whenever something exciting happened. But the world around them was not so forgiving, and the difference in their skin became a constant topic of suspicion. Neighbors whispered when they walked by, their voices carrying despite attempts at discretion. Some would shake their heads and mutter that the lighter-skinned boy must have been adopted, while others accused the darker child of being the result of another man, a mistake in the family line. Their mother bristled at such talk, standing tall in defense of her sons, but the words clung to the air even after she silenced them with her anger. At school, The boys felt the sting of disbelief more sharply. Teachers raised eyebrows when their mother wrote twins on forms. Some even went so far as to question her directly, asking if she had made an error. During roll calls, when the two stood side by side, their classmates laughed and jeered. Children shouted cruel things, calling one of them a liar, insisting that brothers could not look so different. The black child was called illegitimate more than once, while the pale boy was accused of being brought in from somewhere else, his place in the family constantly challenged. The twins, though hurt, clung even more tightly to one another. When the golden-haired brother was teased for being fragile in the sun, his darker-skinned sibling stood between him and the mockery, fists clenched in small but fierce defiance. When the darker brother was accused of being unwanted, the pale boy shouted until his voice cracked, declaring that they had shared the same crib, the same mother, the same life. Their bond became a shield, imperfect but unbreakable, each drawing strength from the other when the weight of the world pressed too heavily. Their mother carried her own burden. She confronted neighbors who whispered too loudly, explained again and again to teachers who looked at her with doubt, and held her sons when they cried after particularly cruel taunts at school. She tried to teach them to walk tall, to ignore the stares and questions, but she knew each wound left a mark. At night, when they finally slept, pressed together as they always had, she would sit nearby and stroke their hair, whispering that love ran deeper than skin, that truth lived in their blood, even if no one else wanted to believe it. The whispers did not fade as the years passed. They followed the family into every store, every schoolroom, every church pew they entered. And yet the boys grew more alike in their mannerisms, more attuned to each other than ever, proof to anyone who cared to truly see that they were not divided. They were whole only because they were together, and though the world insisted otherwise, they refused to let go of that truth. The schoolyard was meant to be a place of noise and play, where children's laughter rose above the sound of sneakers on asphalt and the shrill ring of the bell. For the twins, it became a stage where cruelty revealed itself in small, cutting doses. From the first day they stood side by side in the classroom, the whispers began. One boy's skin was dark and warm, his curls tight against his head, while his brother's skin was pale as milk, his hair golden in the sun. When they announced themselves as twins, the class erupted in disbelief. Laughter spilled from mouths too young to understand the weight of their words, yet sharp enough to wound. "Twins! You're lying!" a boy shouted, his voice carrying across the room. "One of you is day, and the other is night. That's impossible." The insult stuck. It became the name they were called most often. Day and night, repeated with mocking smiles and exaggerated tones. Children tugged at the darker brother's hair, saying no twin of his could have hair so light. Others poked at the pale boy's freckled arms, telling him he must have come from another family, that his mother had probably picked him up from somewhere else. The twins tried to protest, but their words were drowned beneath laughter that grew louder the more they defended themselves. The teachers, who should have silenced the cruelty, did not help. One frowned at the enrollment forms, questioning their mother in front of them, asking if she had made a mistake by writing them down as twins. Another, more blunt, asked for proof in a tone that suggested disbelief was the most natural response. Their mother had to show birth records more than once, and even then the suspicion in the eyes of adults lingered. For the boys, the sting was worse coming from the grown-ups. A child's taunt could be shrugged off, if only for a moment, but when an adult looked at them with doubt, it carved deeper, as though the very truth of their existence was something fragile, always in need of defense. They learned quickly to cling to one another. At lunch, they sat together, their trays touching on the table, their shoulders pressed close. On the playground, when one was surrounded by jeers, the other pushed his way in, standing at his side no matter how small he felt. They developed an unspoken rhythm, a way of exchanging glances that said more than words could. When one's eyes filled with hurt, the other's hand would reach out, steady and strong, a reminder that they were not alone. At home, they asked their mother why the world refused to believe what was true. She would gather them close, her hands smoothing their hair, one set of curls and one crown of gold, and tell them that people often feared what they did not understand. She urged them to hold on to each other, to remember that no laughter or whispers could change the blood they shared. Still, the cruelty weighed on them. Each day at school left new marks, invisible but heavy. They carried them quietly, refusing to let them break apart what they knew in their hearts. They were twins, They had been together since the first beat of their hearts, and no one's disbelief could take that from them. And so they held fast to one another, brothers against the world, enduring the mockery by clinging to the one truth no voice could erase. The boys learned quickly that the world outside could be unkind, but within the walls of their home they built a sanctuary that no cruel word could touch. In their small bedroom, with its peeling paint and mismatched furniture, they created a universe that belonged only to them. They turned old cardboard boxes into castles, scraps of paper into maps of imaginary lands, and the narrow hallway into a racetrack for toy cars that had lost their wheels long ago. Their laughter in those moments was different from the forced smiles they wore at school. It was free, unguarded, a sound that stitched them closer together with each passing day. At night, when the lights were out and the weight of the day pressed heavy on their small shoulders, they would whisper stories to each other across the narrow space between their beds. Sometimes they imagined themselves as explorers crossing deserts and oceans, sometimes as kings of kingdoms where no one doubted they belonged side by side. Their stories often ended the same way, with one saving the other at the last moment, proving in their play what they already knew in life. They were never truly apart. They developed a language that did not rely on words. A glance across a room could speak volumes, a tilt of the head could mean reassurance, a small squeeze of the hand could carry comfort stronger than any speech. In school, when the darker-skinned brother felt the sting of a cruel name, his pale twin would meet his eyes with a look that said he was not alone. When the pale boy grew red-faced under taunts of being adopted, his brother's arm across his shoulders silenced the doubt. Their bond became a shield, invisible yet strong enough to hold back the world. Their mother saw it most clearly. She would watch them at the table, one breaking a piece of bread in half without being asked, sliding it across to his brother, as if sharing were instinct, not decision. She noticed how they rarely fought the way other siblings did, their disagreements fleeting, resolved in moments with a laugh or a glance. She heard their whispers at night, soft voices weaving dreams through the dark, and though her heart ached at what they endured outside, she was grateful for the unshakable strength they drew from each other. Even outsiders who paid closer attention could not deny it. Teachers who once doubted began to notice how the boys mirrored one another's gestures, how they defended each other with a loyalty that was deeper than friendship. A neighbor who had once scoffed at the idea of their twinhood stopped short when she saw them sitting side by side on the porch, heads bent over the same book, their expressions identical as they lost themselves in the story. To anyone who truly looked beyond the surface, it became impossible to miss. These were brothers in every sense, bound by something more powerful than skin or hair, bound by a rhythm that beat in both of their hearts. As they grew, the secret world they had built became less about cardboard castles and more about dreams for the future. They spoke of what they wanted to be, promising each other that no matter where life pulled them, they would face it together. Their bond, tested by cruelty, hardened into something indestructible, a truth so clear that anyone who cared to watch could finally see what they had known all along. They were not opposites, not strangers tied by chance, but halves of the same whole twin souls that the world had tried to deny but could never break. The years had given the brothers strength and resilience, but they had not erased the doubt that followed them everywhere. Their mother had taught them to walk with their heads high, to meet cruel whispers with silence, and to hold on to each other as proof that no one else's disbelief could undo what they knew to be true. Still, the world had a way of forcing its judgment upon them in moments when they least expected it. The breaking point came on a warm afternoon during a crowded community event held in the town square. The space was alive with the chatter of families, the smells of food stalls, and the sounds of children darting between balloons and games. The twins walked side by side with their mother, taller now, their shoulders broadening with adolescence, but still so visibly different that strangers always did a double take. It began innocently enough, with curious glances from those who had not seen them before. Some people whispered in small clusters, pointing out the contrast between the brother with dark skin and coiled hair and the one with pale skin and golden strands that gleamed under the sun. The twins had grown used to this, exchanging a knowing look before brushing it off. They had endured stares their entire lives, and they carried a practiced calm. But this time the whispers swelled into something more. As they passed near the stage where a local speaker was preparing to address the crowd, a man's voice rang out above the murmur. He was tall, dressed in a clean shirt and pressed slacks, his expression sharp with contempt. He pointed directly at their mother, his tone booming so all could hear. "You ought to be ashamed," he declared. "Parading these boys around, calling them twins. Do you take us for fools?" The crowd stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned toward them. Their mother froze in her steps, her arm tightening protectively around both sons. Her lips parted as if to respond, but the man pressed on. His words cut deeper with every syllable. "One black, one white. Don't insult us with lies. One of them isn't yours, or one doesn't belong to the other. Which is it? How long will you keep up this charade?" Humiliation flooded the square. Whispers that had once been muted now spilled openly, some voices laced with disbelief, others with suspicion. Their mother's cheeks burned as she tried to steady her breath, her eyes wide but unyielding. She gathered her strength to speak, to defend her family, but the damage had already been done. The boys felt it in the way the air shifted, the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on them like a storm. For the first time, one of the brothers faltered. The pale-skinned boy, who had always stood with fierce defiance beside his twin, lowered his eyes. Doubt crept in, whispering questions he had never allowed himself to ask. What if the world would never believe them? What if their difference was too much, too visible, too undeniable for people to ever accept? His chest tightened with shame he could not explain, a shame that had no place in his love for his brother, but lodged itself in the cracks of his heart all the same. His twin felt it instantly. He turned, his dark eyes searching his brother's pale face, seeing the hesitation, the silence that should not have been there. For the first time in their lives, the bond that had carried them through playground jeers and classroom doubts felt shaken. The golden-haired boy's shoulders slumped as though the man's accusations had sunk into his skin. Their mother stood tall, her voice trembling but clear as she told the crowd that her sons were born together, that they had shared her womb and her heart. Yet her words were drowned beneath the weight of disbelief. The brothers clung to her sides, their bodies pressed close, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The darker-skinned boy squeezed his twin's hand, desperate to anchor him back to the certainty they had always carried, but he felt the hesitation linger in the way his brother's grip was weaker than before. The moment passed, the crowd eventually turned its attention elsewhere, and the man walked away with the air of someone who believed he had spoken truth. But for the family, the wound remained. It was the day they learned that even their unbreakable bond could be tested by the cruelty of others, and for the first time, one of them wondered if the world's disbelief was a mountain too high to climb. The weeks after the confrontation in the town square felt heavier than any the family had endured before. The mother carried herself with the same firm dignity, but in private she saw the toll it had taken on her sons. The darker-skinned boy grew angrier, his shoulders tight as he clenched his fists whenever the memory of the man's voice came back to him. His pale-skinned twin grew quieter, his golden head bowed more often, his green eyes clouded with doubt. The questions had sunk deeper than the whispers at school ever had. For the first time, their unshakable bond felt threatened not by their love for each other, but by the cruelty of a world determined to deny it. It was during a routine checkup at the local clinic that their story found an unexpected ally. The doctor, a man with graying hair and a calm presence, had known the family since the boys were babies. He had seen them grow, had listened to the mother's stories of their struggles, and now, as teenagers, he could see the heaviness that clung to them. When the mother recounted the latest humiliation, her voice tight with frustration, the doctor set his pen down and leaned forward, his expression grave. "You should not have to live under the burden of other people's disbelief," he said gently. "There are scientific ways to show the truth that you already know. What your family has experienced is rare but not impossible. One twin can be born with lighter skin, while the other with darker skin. It is a matter of genetics, not deceit. If you allow me, I can help prove this once and for all." The mother's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, but of relief that someone finally spoke with authority and compassion. The boys exchanged a glance, the darker one clenching his jaw as though daring hope to enter, while the paler twin lifted his eyes with a spark that had dimmed too long. They agreed to the tests, though their hearts already knew what the results would say. Blood was drawn, DNA samples taken, their veins offering what their appearances had never been allowed to prove. The wait felt endless, but when the results arrived, they carried a clarity that silence could not dispute. The report showed a perfect match, the undeniable markers of siblings who had shared the same womb, the same beginnings of life. They were not just brothers, not just bound by love and circumstance. They were twins. their DNA as entwined as the bond they had carried since birth. The doctor laid the papers in front of them, his voice steady as he explained. This is not an opinion. This is science. You are twins, no matter what anyone else sees when they look at you. The difference in your skin is a reflection of rare genetics, nothing more. The same blood flows through both of you. The mother wept openly, clutching her son's hands on either side of her. The darker twin pressed his forehead against his brother's shoulder, the tension that had weighed him down breaking apart in a rush of relief. The pale boy's lips curved into a smile that trembled with the force of returning certainty. The proof was written plainly now, but it was also painted in the way their hearts beat together again, freed from the poison of doubt. The world might always stare, might always whisper, but they carried in their hands the evidence that matched what had lived in their souls all along. They were twins, different only on the surface, bound forever in blood and in truth. The community center was filled with the murmur of voices and the scrape of chairs against the old wooden floor. People had gathered out of curiosity more than anything else. Some had heard the whispers for years, the gossip that followed the family wherever they went, and they had come expecting to see the same contrast that had fueled their doubts. Others arrived because they had seen the recent humiliation in the town square and wanted to know what truth had finally come to light. The room carried a mix of skepticism and anticipation, but it quieted when the mother stepped onto the small stage with her sons at her side. The twins walked together, shoulders brushing, their steps perfectly in sync, as if rehearsed by years of moving through the world as one. One boy's skin was dark and glowing under the harsh lights, his curls cropped neatly, his posture proud. Beside him, his brother's pale skin seemed almost luminous, his golden hair catching the light in a way that made him look like a flame beside the earth. The contrast was undeniable, but so too was the way they leaned subtly toward one another, their hands brushing as if tethered by an invisible thread. Their mother's voice trembled at first as she began to speak, not from weakness but from the weight of carrying this truth for so long. She told the story of their birth, of the way nurses and relatives had doubted from the very beginning, and of the years of ridicule that had followed. She spoke of the cruel names they had endured at school, of the disbelief even from adults who should have known better, and of the confrontation in public that had nearly broken her son's spirits. The room was silent, every ear turned toward her. She held up the results of the DNA tests, her voice steadier now, explaining the rare genetic condition that had caused such difference in appearance but not in their blood. Then she stepped aside, and the boys themselves stood before the crowd. They did not give speeches or grand explanations. They simply stood side by side, their eyes level with the people who had doubted them. The darker-skinned twin reached out and clasped his brother's pale hand, lifting it high. It was not a gesture rehearsed or forced, but one born from years of clinging to each other in hallways and on playgrounds, of whispering stories in the dark when the world felt against them. The silence in the hall deepened. The whispers that had once been cruel and mocking were gone. In their place was awe, the dawning realization that what people had doubted for so long was real, undeniable. Some in the crowd lowered their eyes in shame, others blinked against the sudden sting of tears. What stood before them was not a trick or an illusion, but living proof that love and identity run deeper than appearances, that family is written not only on the skin but in the blood and in the bond no ridicule could erase. Their mother pulled them close, her arms wrapping around their shoulders, her face wet with tears but shining with pride. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then rising into a swell that filled the room and echoed against the walls. For once, the family did not leave under the cloud of doubt. They left admired, heads held high, no longer mocked but honored. The boys walked out into the night with the same steps they had always shared, side by side, bound together by truth that no one could deny again.